In modern life, it seems like the impact of humans is everywhere on the landscape. It's rare for many of us to be away from the sounds of traffic. But there are still some very special places. Places where nature has been left natural. In this series, we'll take you into some of these very special places and help you reconnect with nature and fall back in love with the wild.
The St. Mary's River is such a dynamic system. Because it has floodplain along it, water levels change through the year, you'll get ice cakes in winter, and you get these forests that are adapted to that regular flooding. Places along that river, you can walk underneath these huge red oaks, huge red maples, species that are well adapted to having water come flooding through a couple of times a year, and some higher up that maybe only get flooded every 20 years or every 50 years. And these places are rare in Nova Scotia. There's so few places where you can have floodplain forest left. And you get a real richness, diversity of species in there. You get a sense of wonder in being small under a huge canopy of forest like that. And I hope those trees are still there in 200 years and that they're even older and grander.
Mark Pulsifer has lived in this area since 1988. He's enjoyed a long and rewarding career as a wildlife biologist with the provincial government and has worked on many projects over the years along the St. Mary's River.
The St. Mary's has the west branch, the east branch, the north branch. It runs for a long space, probably 250 kilometers in distance. And what's really fascinating about it is it drains about 1,400 square kilometers of land spanning 5 counties. It's a tremendously dynamic river, and it just offers so much, really, from the point of view of recreation, ecology, things like that. It's really why it's a flagship river for the province.
The St. Mary's River isn't only a fantastic place for fish and other river dwellers. It's also a part of a much larger drainage basin. Between the river and the higher land lie the floodplains, a very important place for plants, animals, and humans.
Down both sides of this river for hundreds of kilometers, we have this riparian zone and all the tributary streams, and they all feed into that. Riparian areas basically refer to the upland area that's adjacent to watercourses. The riparian area here, and for other places around this section of the west branch of the river, is really nothing more than floodplain. It's a wetland type. These are forested floodplains that do an awful lot. They have an awful lot of value. There's a lot of natural capital all tied up in these areas that these riparian areas contribute to the overall well-being of the river system itself, contribute to the well-being of the ecosystem at large, and a variety of things. I mean, everything from sequestering carbon to providing habitat for species at risk, or habitat for species that aren't at risk, or filtering water, or contributing to local climate, local weather patterns, and things like that.
In 2020, the provincial government designated a large portion of the publicly held lands along the St. Mary's River, as well as the connecting floodplains and watershed, as a provincial park. This designation, combined with lands already protected by other groups, will help ensure the health of the entire St. Mary's Basin. Caitlin Grady works with CPAWS, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. They work to protect publicly owned areas that have a high conservation value, places that we can't afford to lose, places like the St. Mary's River Watershed.
We've essentially been involved in identifying high conservation value forest areas. We've also been advocating for the creation of more legally protected areas on public lands along the watershed, and one of those is the St. Mary's River Provincial Park. So the St. Mary's River Provincial Park is actually a protected area that's part of this 30-kilometer corridor along the river. It's part of the West Branch and the main branch of the St. Mary's River. So it's combined with nature trust properties and other private protected lands, but it's the main portion of protected public lands along the watershed. It's a really important area to protect because it's all connected. So you have rainfall coming down onto a hill, it flows down into the ocean eventually, and all of this area is truly connected. So this watershed as a whole needs to be protected, and it's not simply just about one river or one branch of the river. This watershed is so important ecologically, it's so important for the community, and we want to ensure that it's protected and can remain that way in a natural state forever. We've seen that the St. Mary's River Provincial Park has been legally designated very recently. We want to see a similar result for places like Archibald Lake Wilderness Area.
The St. Mary's Provincial Park designation is just the beginning for CPAWS and the local community. Archibald Lake feeds into the St. Mary's River, and this lake is part of a proposed open-pit gold mine.
We want to see this area protected, and there's a great opportunity to do that. However, there are proposals to divert water from this really special place for industrial activities. And I mean, when you just consider how incredibly significant this place is for conservation, it's a bad idea. I think as a young person, I feel that it's really a responsibility of my generation to make sure that we are conserving as much land as possible. I think I realize that we are at a really critical time where we're facing dual crises of the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, and we're one of the last generations that can do anything about it. And I think this work is so important, and I admire everybody who's involved in it.
Up next, environmental educator Erin Drage offers her final Leave No Trace principle. Be considerate of other visitors.
Hi, I'm Erin Drage. I'm a conservationist and environmental educator, and next up we're talking about Leave No Trace principle number 7, be considerate of other visitors. The last Leave No Trace principle is one of the easiest and most obvious. It's just being considerate of other visitors on the trail. So when you're out in nature, it's important to make sure that you're not impeding on the experiences of other people who are trying to enjoy the natural environment. Some ways you can do that is by keeping your voices hushed, trying to be quiet, not playing loud music, to not disturb them while they're out enjoying the natural sounds. It's also really nice if you can try to yield to hikers who are heading uphill on a trail. So if you're coming downhill, just take a quick step off the trail and let them pass by. Different protected areas will also have different designations of trail use, so sometimes you'll be on a multi-use trail that's made for hikers and for bikers. In these situations, it's just nice to be aware that other people are using nature in a different way than you, and to give each other space out in the natural environment. At the end of the day, respecting other visitors in nature is just about being nice and kind, having some backcountry etiquette, and making sure that everyone is safe and happy on their nature adventure.
It was 1989 when Mark Pulsifer first heard of the wood turtle and its need for help. A species listed as threatened, the wood turtle is dependent on the St. Mary's River and the surrounding floodplain for its survival.
Over the course of that time, we've been able to document some of their behaviors. I mean, in terms of how far do they travel for food. We've been able to identify, or at least better understand, where they like to nest, where they like to overwinter, like spend their time under the water through the winter. We know roughly how often they're injured. I mean, there are species at risk for several reasons. The wood turtle specifically has habitat needs that are found along this river. And one in particular is in front of me across the river. There's a large nesting beach right there. Wood turtles require sand and gravel beaches or bars in order to lay their eggs. We happen to have, given the dynamic nature of the St. Mary's River, the river system that's slow to moderately flowing with enough energy to deposit sediments, sand, gravel, cobble, small rocks, things like that, on these turns and bends in the river, which the wood turtles really benefit from. Wood turtles also need to overwinter in areas where they're not going to be damaged by ice. There are lots of places in the river where the water is around 1 meter or more, and that happens to be a critical depth for wood turtles. So we have nesting habitat, we have overwintering habitat. Now, those two things in particular are referred to as critical habitat, meaning that the population just can't sustain itself without those two things. And so it's important to know, basically, that this river has that. On the upland side of that, these turtles also love to forage for wild strawberries, mushrooms, slugs. They eat a variety of insects, even some grasses and things like that. So you put all those puzzle pieces together and you end up with pretty darn good wood turtle habitat. And certainly as a result of that, the turtles here are doing okay. I'm an optimist by nature, and so I think that from what I've seen here is that there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. I think as we learn more, and we are, our policies for land use practices are changing every year, and I think we are getting to where we need to be. We're not there yet, but we are getting better at what we're doing, and I think that should give us reason, to hope in general.
What's helped fuel the success of the wood turtle population on the St. Mary's River is a combination of scientific research to understand the habits and risks to the turtles, education of the community to ensure the turtles aren't accidentally harmed, and conservation to protect their habitats.
Obviously, conservation is a huge topic, and it's hugely important, and it goes hand in hand with a land ethic. goes hand in hand with stewardship. I have to say that in my experience, it's hard to imagine a community embracing a project and contributing to that land ethic, that land stewardship, as much as this community here in the St. Mary's River has embraced wood turtles. It's not always government that does it, right? It's not always just the government with their deeper pockets and their different programs they have. Most of these things aren't going to work well unless they're embraced by the local community. And this community really stepped up big time. And I think in a lot of ways, that's why the St. Mary's River campaign that the Nature Trust, Nova Scotia Nature Trust, has been really doing a marvelous job of over the past many years. And I think that's why it's been successful. The people here really, truly appreciate what they have. Even though this particular river system has wood turtles, overall, provincially, we believe that the wood turtle population is actually declining. So, again, another reason to draw people's attention to the beauty of the river, to the need for conservation, the need for stewardship, to celebrate when we have lands protected along the river, because those all become very, very important pieces of the puzzle down the road when it comes to ensuring that certain activities that may be detrimental to some of these different species, it could be moose, it could be wood turtles, it could be brook floaters, that perhaps it's less likely that any activities obviously aren't going to be impacting those species, because these nature trust lands, these other protected lands that are set aside for any number of reasons along the river, pretty much ensure that, for perpetuity now, the species that are using these lands or are impacted by these lands are going to benefit from that.
Land protection and stewardship along the St. Mary's watershed has been instrumental in ensuring the long-term viability of wood turtles and many, many other species that depend on the river. Up next, we'll hear from local land stewards Clyde and Bonnie McGrath. Don't go away. Without conservation and stewardship, wild places, especially beautiful places like the St. Mary's River, will always be at risk of development. But the community along this river saw that the area deserved so much more.
So we started working there way back in 2006. We knew from a scientific point of view, the river kept coming up as a priority for endangered species and a priority for floodplain forests and old-growth forests. And so we just had a community meeting, and it was hosted by one of the landowners on the river, who's a passionate conservationist himself, Hardy Eschbau. And he just invited all of his neighbors to come and hear about the Nature Trust and why we thought the river was so special. And they were so excited, because this river, if you meet anyone in that community, they're passionate about the St. Mary's River. Whether it's because they're a fisherman or just someone who's lived on the river for generations, they love the river and they love this idea of protecting it, because they knew it's all privately owned, it's at risk. It could all be sold and developed and privatized. Since then, we've now protected 16 properties all along the river, and together with the Crown, that's 9,000 acres of land that's been assembled to create that ribbon of green.
Clyde and Bonnie McGrath grew up in Melrose, a community along the St. Mary's River. It was always home to them, even though their careers took them away for their working years. When they retired, the first thing they did was head back home for good. In 2015, they got involved with volunteering for the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. Today, they help steward the lands they love so much.
We're just taking care of it, and we're sort of the eyes and ears that are right here. And actually, when I go on my walk every day, I walk along here and pass by like 4 properties every day.
Bonnie and I, we were looking at something to do after we retired, and we went to a meeting one night, and that's how it started for us. And like this area, the properties that they have, it's all been part of our life for, well, I'm almost 68, so we've traveled this to the river here, and everything's always been in my life, so it's pretty important to us. We lived all over Nova Scotia, but this was always home. It didn't matter. We lived in another house for 26 years, but this was home. It's pretty nice to be able to say that, this is in our backyard.
We see kingfishers, we see turtles. Just up there, we saw 3 bears swimming across the river, and I actually got pictures of them.
The bears are everywhere. We've seen otters here different times, and it's amazing. This whole area right here is protected. It's not going to be anything done on it from, other than leave it the way it is. Directly behind me here is one of the largest old-growth hemlocks in Nova Scotia. It's beautiful. If you go up the West River here, you'll see there's a lot of land for sale that they've built cottages and cottages on. And here, you know that they can't do that. And the areas that are protected, this one across the river from us right now is a massive floodplain, so you couldn't build anything on it anyway. And the beautiful oak trees, and it's something to walk through. It's a cathedral. You know that it's not going to be logged, or it's not going to be old cars on it or something like that. So it's just nice to see it's going to stay natural. It'll still be like this. It's better than seeing big tracts of subdivisions and stuff like that being built on it. And I like to, we'll have our great-grandchildren maybe be able to walk this and say that, this was the same as it was 200 years ago. So it would be nice.
And I really hope that generations to come will be able to enjoy along the river and see that pristine river and the scenery. This is how we'd like to see it, just nice, peaceful. You can hear the birds, yeah, it's great. It's so peaceful here. Mm.
The St. Mary's River and the communities along its banks are special. It's a place where the trees, wildflowers, fish, turtles, bears, and so many other plants and animals can thrive. It's also a place that is loved by the local people. If you ever have the opportunity to come to this area, make sure you pay a visit to this magical place. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.